is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to be here today with Otto Scharmer and Stephanie Gerard of Presencing Institute. We are here today to celebrate the launch of Otto's latest book, The Essentials of Theory U, and we are honored and thrilled that you have decided to join us. As you are beginning to join us, we want to let you know about a few factors for today's broadcast. The first is that we are recording today's event, and we will be sending you an email with some follow-up materials after the event, including a link to the recording so that if you'd like to share it with a friend or if you'd like to watch it again, you will be able to access the recording. The next thing that I would like you to know is that there's going to be an online conversation happening on Twitter. And if you would like to join by sharing your thoughts throughout today's event, we would invite you to hop on over to Twitter while you're on this broadcast. And please use the hashtag TheoryU, capital U, just like the title of the book. And if you're just interested in checking out that conversation after the event, you'll be able to see what your colleagues and collaborators are sharing. The next thing that we would like to let you know is that we will be opening up for some Q&A toward the end of today's session. So we're going to start today's session with some prepared questions with Otto so he can bring out the key concepts of his latest book. And then toward the end of this hour, we're going to open up the line. So you can find the Q&A panel, and when you put your question in, what we'd like to ask you to do is let us know if for some reason you do not want to come on camera. If possible, we'd like to bring you on camera to ask your question live to Otto, but if you would not like to, we can also read your question. So when you put the question in the question panel, go ahead and indicate if you're not willing to be on camera. The next thing is related to Zoom's functionality. So you might want to take a quick moment to take a look at whether you are in the speaker view or the gallery view. So the speaker view will allow you to see the person who is speaking large on camera, and the gallery view will have all three of our images equal. You can toggle between those using the functionality in the top right of your Zoom panel, and we would welcome you to do that. So I want to take a quick moment. I don't know how many of you are already familiar with Otto and his work, but as we dive into the content today, just a quick introduction of Otto. As you probably know, Otto is a senior lecturer at MIT, and he travels around the world sharing his core ideas with many people and making a huge difference. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, he's also the author of this new book, The Essentials of Theory U. So let's go ahead and dive right in, Otto. Otto, welcome.
Thank you very much, Becky, and thanks everyone for joining for this launch session.
So let's start with this book, Otto. What prompted or inspired you to write the book, and why do you think it is so important for our current time?
Well, what prompted the book certainly was many requests from people who said, "Look, you know, I love this stuff. You know, I'm using that in my work, or I would, you know, like to use it even more. But I wished I had like a shorter version, something I could give to my boss, kind of something I could give to other stakeholders I'm dealing with, where the whole thing would be explained." Maybe a little more clearly and a little shorter than, say, 500 pages with lots of tables and footnotes, which is the original version of Theory U. So I heard that from many of my friends and colleagues, and then, you know, came the publisher who said, "Look, you know, this book has been translated, I don't know, 20-some languages, and it's selling well, but frankly, we don't quite know why, because it sort of meets all the criteria that makes the book unreadable, right? Like more than 500 pages, endless tables, and you know, footnotes and so forth." So that was basically the prompt that made me moving into, you know, having, you know, used all these original concepts and methods and tools. Now I think I'm able to say it a little more clearly and more succinct, and maybe also to some degree more personal and practical. So that prompted the book. Why is it important now? Maybe to get the word out, even beyond the community that's currently using it. You know, at the beginning of the book, there's a little story kind of from my youth, kind of when I came home from school, and our 300 some years farmhouse, the old farmhouse, was on fire, basically burned down to the ground. And that was like an experience kind of that, shook me in the core, and that, allowed me to connect to some of the deeper levels of my own experience of who I am or who I could be. And what's happening today is not kind of the farm on fire, but you could say to some degree it's our whole society, our whole world, our whole planet is sort of on fire, in an on fire situation, meaning a crisis point, a breaking point that requires a new movement, that requires us to rethink how we organize around our economy, kind of how we advance democracies and these kind of things. And that's really, this bigger crisis, kind of, which is kind of our larger situation we are in, kind of that certainly also inspired this rewriting of that book and advancing it also. And I want to share a little, maybe picture here from my dear colleague, Calvi Bird, who provided also the artwork for the book. And she really captured this idea of, what I just described, kind of the crisis of a current moment, in a very evocative image she just shared with me. So it's for a blog post that hasn't even been published. So this is more than, it's not, coming, fresh out of the printing press. It's kind of pre-printing press here, this one. What is the crisis of our time? Really, three things. We live in an age that is, where our current condition is characterized by post-truth, post-democracy, and post-planet. And what I mean with post-truth is that we are like trapped in digital echo chambers, kind of that we are like, it's ever more difficult for us kind of to move outside of our own bubble, kind of our own institutional, behavioral, and digital bubble. Post-democracy, you see, she captured very well. What do we see there? Our societies are breaking apart, and there's no more disturbing example than the United States, right? The United States is no longer one country. It's kind of breaking apart in communities that have less connection with each other ever more. So that's, this de-integration there, this kind of breaking into pieces. That's the post-democracy, and with all the phenomena we are familiar. And the post-planet really is kind of this whole meme around. If you go to the movies, you can't find this. You almost cannot find a movie that does not start with a doomsday scenario where the planet is destroyed, and where, that's almost like the starting point of every kind of emerging future narrative. And so this, and what it really means, I think, is a disconnect from our own collective agency, kind of this feeling that we can actually, since we are inflicting this harm on the planet and on each other, we are actually able to turn this around. This kind of sense of collective agency has, to a large degree, been disappearing, particularly as far as the macro structures like capitalism are concerned. So that's really what I believe, kind of, that's kind of what is the bigger inspiration of the book. And if you just give me 1 second here. So this is the other picture that Kelly, who, by the way, also just published a great book that the book Generative Scribing, kind of where she develops a whole new, evolves kind of the whole art form of, she develops the concept of a social art that is in support of this new work. So it's highly recommended. So what she does, what she did here is to really visualizing the journey kind of that we are in. And that, I believe, really is representing our current situation and what we see going on in our societies today. which is there's like, if you go to the today point, the red point here, there's like three main reactions people have to the current situation of disruption. One is same old, so nothing, no much change. The second one is turning backwards, kind of turning back to the good old past in order to make ... great again. And then the other one is, leaning forward, leaning into the emerging future, developing these new forms of learning, advancing democracy, reinventing kind of our economy. And that's basically, what I believe our current situation is. So in the book, I share this key idea relatively upfront by saying, okay, so the three reactions, the three gestures to the current situation of crisis is: one, downloading. This is turning backwards. And what it really means is kind of we are closing our mind, closing our heart, closing our will. We are amplifying ignorance, hate, and fear. And you're all familiar with these numbers by now, I'm sure. 2,140, the number of lies and misleading statements by President Trump in his first year in office. So in other words, that number is way up by now. Desensing, that's kind of the second behavior. The number here is 70. Fake news, so alternative facts, you could say, are 70% more likely, according to a recent MIT study, to be shared than actual real news. So that's how the digital social media environment is discriminating against factual information, unintentionally actually. And then kind of the ego first is really kind of the disconnect to our real sources of self and creativity. And then the last two behaviors, blaming others and destruction, that's really, building up the walls, us versus them. So we see that all over, not only in the US, we see that in many communities today with the rise of populism, the rise of the far right. And what does all of this mean? We are en route to self-destruction. We are kind of destroying nature, pulling out of Paris. We are destroying trust, in our key institutions in society. And of course, it's also eventually a journey of self-destruction. The third gesture, leaning forward, is really about this. It's about strengthening the capacity of our curiosity, compassion, and courage, or of opening the mind, heart, and will. And what we see in the world is a lot of all three. Some people continue with same old. And then we see a lot of phenomena where collectively we move into the blue space. Sometimes we are part of it. Sometimes we see it outside of ourselves. And then in our better moments, I would say we are part of creating this yellow wall in the lower part of this visual. But what we see in reality is that even though in reality we have a lot of the blue, a lot of the yellow, in public perception and in public conversation, it's almost only about the blue. And in social media, it's the same. So it's, as I said, the 70%. So kind of the negative fake news is amplified at a much higher degree than it is when we talk about inspiring stories that try to create, to bridge the divides that put us apart today. And that's really, so for me, the intention to contribute to this lower part, to contribute to an amplification mechanism that helps us to really realign our attention and intention, to really realign our attention on these seeds of the future that are growing in so many communities right now, but that aren't quite visible enough to really reshape the public discourse and the public conversation. to help these seeds to connect to each other and to be more visible and more able to shape the public conversation. That's certainly a big part of my inspiration today. And of my inspiration to really write this book, to make these ideas and practices, but really also this community, because it's kind of a community, a global community of change makers who use these methods and tools to make them more available and also to create infrastructures that help them to connect to each other.
Thanks, Otto. So we're aware that there may be some people on the call for whom this idea of presencing and theory you are new. So could you take a few minutes to explain the essence of this work? And you've obviously already started to dive into that.
Well, the essence of the work, I mean, if you could, one way of describing it maybe is like with gestures, right? Or with kind of how we really, you could say the essence of the work is realigning attention and intention. And really shaping our attention, shaping our listening in a way that is connected more with reality, and it's connected more with kind of emerging reality, and that's aligned with our deeper intention that we try to be in service of with your life. So if I would, use my hands for that, right, I would say, what is the essence of presencing? It's really about 3 movements. The first movement is this. It's kind of a horizontal connection, establishing kind of a horizontal connection. It's the I-thou relationship, you could say. It's kind of getting out of my own bubble, right? So I gave the numbers of kind of all the huge forces that keep us trapped into our existing bubble, right? That's a challenge for each of us. So the first movement is kind of connecting and listening and attending, kind of putting myself outside of my own bubble, the horizontal connection. The second movement is the vertical connection, kind of connecting with my true purpose, kind of connecting with my deeper intention in life, and linking my attention with that, so that there is linking my attention with my intention. So that's the second connection. It connects me more vertically, and it makes, allows me to connect with a deeper level of my own awareness, of my own consciousness. And then the third one is connecting with what's emerging from the now. So if you really deepen these 2 connections in parallel, you connect horizontally, you deepen your vertical connection, what happens is that something is beginning. You connect to the world in a way that allows you that something is emerging from yourself. You notice kind of from that deepened experience of reality, something begins to emerge through you. And that's what you're paying attention to, and you try to be in service of and bring it more into reality. So it's kind of, that's like more like a creative movement where something is being born, or you begin to notice something, maybe just a response you have that is connecting. And obviously, when I say knowing here, I mean not a knowing that resides here, but it's a knowing that's emerging from your heart. So in a way, another way of really describing the essence of presencing is activating the knowing of our heart, not only as an individual, but also in our communities, and putting that into the service of the well-being of all. So that's another way of saying the same thing, but on a more technical, which means how do I shape my attention in the current moment? I think these 3 things: horizontal connection, vertical alignment, and then noticing what's emerging from the now and helping that to be born or to move into reality more fully is probably a good summary.
Thank you, Otto. So I'd love to hear how you see your ideas of presencing and theory you being used and how you apply them personally.
Well, I think they're being used widely, to some degree, much more widely than, for example, the book is being read, right? And why is that? Because I didn't, it's not really my brainchild. Kind of, I thought about that and then I discovered it in the world. No, I went out into the world and applied this process. I was actually listening to people who are creating new stuff in the world, right? In science, in business, kind of in society. And noticing their process, kind of, I came up with these concepts and with these notions. So in other words, I really, so a lot of these practices described there, that they're inherent in our best practice, kind of inherent when kind of something new is being born in our communities, kind of in our context. So in that regard, you see, aspects of it in many places already applied, but often we also see the lack thereof. And what certainly Theory U does, it's kind of providing a language for that. In my own context, I would say it's also very natural, kind of. Because a lot of presencing is a word. It's actually not a word, right? You don't find it in the dictionary yet, but it is a blend of two words, sensing and presence, and it means to sense and actualize emerging future possibilities. To sense and actualize my highest future possibility. So where was that, where I really experienced that maybe the first time in my life on a mass scale? Answer: when I engage in grassroots movements, right? When you march in the streets, kind of when you and your generation kind of team up against something or for something, kind of there is like a vibe. I experienced that in the late 70s and early 80s across Europe, right? And there is like, it's a feeling kind of, you don't need to lecture the other person about kind of the future, what you want to see and so on. There is an intuitive understanding what moves the other person, what moves me, that there is kind of a deep alignment, which is a felt sense of a possibility of the future that's very different from what we see today. And kind of it's that kind of felt sense of that field of future possibility that really, is what presencing is all about, right? And so how do I use that? So how have I used that? Well, first, I experienced that really on a mass scale there in grassroots movements. Number two, as many other people do, when I make important choices in my life, what voice am I listening to? This voice, maybe a little bit, sure. This voice, a lot also, because kind of it's the feeling knowing that really allows us. When you have complex decisions to do, and I remember one we did like in our core team here in Berlin, the core presencing team that was meeting here in Berlin. So we were leaning into it. There were like 3 different options we needed to contemplate. You cannot like abstract discuss that. You need to flesh out these options, to lean into that, and then notice the feeling, how you feel there, what's kind of emerging from your feeling there. Then you do the same thing with the next, and then you do the same thing with the next. And from these responses that you feel, you develop the knowing that will tell you which one is the right thing to do. So I'm sure many people do that. And what I just described is just what Steve Jobs, right, in his famous Stanford commencement speech, basically said it much more succinctly when he said, there is, you can see the emerging future only kind of in retrospect. Yeah, you can make sense only in retrospect. Yet we need to make choices moving forward. What's the only navigation instrument that we have? Answer: your heart. There's no reason not to listen to your heart. So that was basically, that's the short version of the speech, and that's also the short version of presencing.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, from your experience, Otto, working in all sectors of society, you mentioned business and government and nonprofits. What are the important core principles of Theory U and presencing?
Well, if you talk about like more from applied practices, so what really does it look like and feel like, and what is it we pay more attention to, or what is it we pay less attention to? I would say in the first stage, the co-initiating, we pay a lot attention to listening. In fact, if there's anything, if I would just, when I just, after thousands of people who gave feedback kind of about changes that they experienced in their own life and work. The number one topic probably is listening. If you change and you think, well, I changed, I deepened the way I listen and I connect to the world. What's the big deal with that, right? No one will notice. Well, if you change how you pay attention to the world, and if your way of paying attention, your way of listening is different, that means everything is different, because everything, your whole life experience is arising from that. So it's like, it sounds like very minimal, but I think it's a big shift. So deepening the quality of listening, how you listen to others, to yourself, and to what's emerging kind of from your kind of connection with others. And then creating like containers, kind of creating like generative holding spaces that allow groups to drop to the deeper levels of dialogue. I think that's something we pay a lot of attention to early on, because we know basically that when you do a project, when you take on a big initiative, what's the social reality of that? The social reality is you create a field, and you better create a generative field, because whatever DNA you create in the beginning is going to be replicated later on. So you want to go slow to go fast. You want to invest upfront into the quality social field that you generate, because that's what gives you a leverage later on. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we pay a lot attention to really getting out of your own bubble, kind of moving out of the workshop space, moving out of the headquarters, kind of really immersing yourself at the edges, on the peripheries, kind of taking deep dive journeys into the places of most potential. So that's something we pay a lot of attention to. And that's really where new ideas are being born, not by sitting in the headquarters, but by being out there in the front line and immersing yourself in the places of most potential. Third thing is a lot of contemplative practices. Now, there's like, from the various contemplative traditions, there's great things we can use for individual practice, but what we, of course, pay also greatly attention to is kind of the collective, reflection and contemplative practices. And that's where we use kind of creative practices, we add new methods and tools kind of from the Presencing Institute practitioner community. So that's a third key aspect that moves more to the work at the bottom of the U. And of course, nature is kind of our greatest teacher and guide and resource also there. Then number 4 on the prototyping, I would say, so what is it? So we greatly encourage people or force people to really explore their ideas by doing, which moving into some version of a prototype, which means it's not a plan, it's something that you do, it's something that allows you to generate feedback from others, and that's where design thinking and all the other great tools kind of are a great source of inspiration. And the last one is on the scaling, really, thinking and creating a generative field in the context of the entire ecosystem of partners. So this kind of larger space, so this larger coherence, and how to develop mechanisms that make the larger system sense and see itself. That's probably the 5th version, kind of where we pay a lot of attention to. A lot of these details, of course, are in the book, are on the Presencing Institute website, and the other kind of online resources that we have been developing over the past few years.
Thanks so much. Can we speak for a few minutes about the role of human awareness and consciousness in your ideas around presencing and Theory U? And I've noticed in the chat some comments about human development. So it would be great to tie into that, what human development means for you.
Well, you could say, when you say, all right, so, what is it really, kind of this whole Theory U, what is this approach really about? I would say it is part of, emerging new cluster of methods and tools that I would refer to as awareness-based systems change. So it's systems change, yes, but it's kind of with a specific focus, which is kind of awareness-based, which means that what we really try to do in our interventions is to shift the level of awareness or consciousness that people operate from in their everyday work. So the claim that we have is that the quality of results in any kind of system are a function of the quality of awareness that the people in these systems operate from. So it's not form follows function, but it's form follows consciousness. Kind of that's, if you want a shorthand. And what it really practically means is so that it's not enough if you change a system to just tinker with the structure, to redesign the process. You really need to shift the mindset. And how do you shift the mindset? How do you shift the thinking, the awareness, the consciousness? That's, what, we have, it's basically, that's kind of the key focus of our interventions. And a lot deals with making the system see itself. And from a theory U perspective, I would say we go one step further. So making the system see itself, that's systems thinking, right? That's kind of awareness-based systems change. Theory U goes, I would say, kind of one step further. It's like making the system sense and see itself. In other words, we play particular emphasis on the sensing, on the activation of the senses, not only on the individual, but also on the collective level, on the dimension of embodied knowing. Because if I'm just seeing what's broken with the system, but I don't feel the pain kind of those that are excluded, probably my interventions are just stuck here in the head. They are not really reaching my hand because they're, they lack the dimension of the heart. So that's where we try to activate the dimension of the heart. We try to bridge the knowing-doing gap by activating the knowing of the heart, of the collective. That's really, maybe a shorthand of saying that. And that's how it relates into the larger landscape, which is the landscape of awareness-based systems change, which I believe is very important. It's a movement. It's something we try to be in service of. And as a practitioner, so I'm, for example, like many probably watching this, I'm not just, part of my life is like I'm a researcher. I came up with concepts, methods, tools. I develop these things. But then, much of my time, I'm like everyone else, a practitioner, right? And what do you do as a practitioner? Kind of you're confronted with situations, practical situations, and then you need to integrate a lot of different stuff in order to be useful, to be helpful, which includes theory tools, which includes kind of methods and tools from some other traditions of also awareness-based systems change. And what makes me happy really is that I see more and more practitioners using the theory framework as a meta framework that allows you to hang in and to link a variety of these other methods and tools. Because as practitioners, we all have the same problem. We need to integrate all this stuff because, all the researchers, they only create their own thing there and then, leave the integration to the practitioners. And what's kind of a helpful meta framework there. And that's where the theory U framework in part has been useful. And that's also how I use it as a practitioner.
Thank you so much. Can we talk about ego versus ecosystem? And would you describe that shift and share your vision of a new economy, Otto?
Well, you could say, I think that's a fair way of putting it, that regardless whether you're running or a company or whether you're working from inside a company, medium or a big company, whether you're working from a foundation, whether you're working from an NGO or like a governmental agency. In all these situations, we basically have the same key leadership challenge, which is in order to make impact, to make progress on what are some of the most pressing challenges today, we cannot do it alone. We have to pull together a diverse group of stakeholders. We need to bring them together And actually, we need to bring them on a journey where they move from one way of thinking and talking, which is basically their silo perspective, or you could say ecosystem perspective, to a system view that is more inclusive of the perspective of others, or you could say ecosystem, right? And this ego to eco shift, kind of from silo, me, to really not only knowing, but also feeling what it looks like, feels like for the others, kind of this extended awareness, that really, if you can do that in your system, you have a collective body that you can work with to sense together, to make sense together, that to think, to make distinctions kind of about what's broken, what's not, and then to generate ideas and explore them by doing really quickly, because it's not kind of fragmented into pieces that fight against each other. And that's pretty much kind of what we do, kind of when what we try to be helpful with, and what we help practitioners and in lab processes or other processes to develop. So I see the ego to ego shift as the #1 leadership challenge today. And I see us as developing methods and tools that try to be helpful to deal with that task.
So how about your vision of a new economy?
Well, the new economy basically is, applying this shift, this ego to eco shift around all key acupuncture point areas that we see, kind of that has to do with rethink nature from a commodity to an ecosystem, really rethink labor from jobs to some real work that I'm passionate about, where I want to have impact, rethink capital from extractive to dedicated to serving, and so on. So I could go on. And in fact, kind of if, people, those of us who are more interested in that, if you go to the transforming capitalism site, kind of that we will be launching April 1st. I will show a little later, maybe a slide or two on that. That's where we will have a lot of examples and resources where we want to showcase in all these key acupuncture point areas where capitalism is being transformed or needs a transformation. Where are the examples, kind of where that's already kind of enacted, embodied? What can we learn from that? And how can we make the tools that allow these people to do that available to everyone? So it's a major 2-year effort that we are launching in a few weeks, and I'm so excited. And in fact, my key intention about the book launch, right, is yes, I want to talk about the book, but more importantly, I want to talk about the Transforming Capitalism Lab that we are about to launch, and that really puts all the key idea that the book is putting forward into practice and makes it really available to everyone. So that's hopefully something that we can also put in as a link in the follow-up email, and I will maybe show a picture or two later on.
Well, let's go to that. Otto, I'd love to hear what is currently challenging and inspiring you the most. And then we're going to shift to some of the attendee questions that have been coming in. So if you have some, you can feel free to put those in the Q&A. And don't forget to let us know whether or not you're comfortable being on video with us.
Yes. Okay. So that was just before the Q&A. So let me maybe say a few words. What's really in the making, and that's kind of the real reason, truly, kind of why I wrote the book. And when you notice for those of you who have looked into the Theory U book. When you look into the last chapter, I think it's the epilogue, kind of it, it's basically describing a vision of the future that I have held for a few years, you could say. And so you go to my first book, you go to my second book, and it's basically the same ending, right? So, you can ask yourself, well, what? It's the same thing. So where's the evolution, right? And now you go to the new book, and then it's again similar. So you could say one reaction would be, well, there's really zero evolution at all. But that's not quite true, because there's something that has changed. And this something is that what was described as a mere idea like 10, 15 years ago, now actually is beginning to happening in so many places. it's so exciting. And it is, so I spent like many years of my life kind of to be partly excited, but deep in my stomach, I'm frustrated, right? Because there's a much bigger aspiration that I felt wasn't being realized at all. And that's interesting. So I turned 56 this year. And as my body is growing older, to some degree, my energy is getting younger, because it feels right now in my life in many ways that I'm only now, after many detours and winding roads you take in your life's journey, I'm finally now coming back what was actually my point of departure all way long, kind of. And really what I maybe had as a feeling, not as a vision really, but as a feeling when I was in my early 20s. And a lot has to do with this here, kind of the new university, a new type of university that's not like behind walls, but that's kind of enfolded, it's kind of connected with renewing, regenerating our economy, kind of our democracy, our ways of learning and living and leading together. So just 3 pictures, right, on that kind of emerging university. The first key focus area that we see here, you see that in these, is really about labs, bringing people together across sectors, bringing stakeholders that need each other in order to change a system together across sectors and help them to innovate at the scale of the whole system. So we have done that in a variety of countries, in a variety of systems and sectors. I could say more to these pictures here, but let me just go on, because these stories are really also in the book, most of them. And then, oops, I have a little navigation challenge here. So that's kind of the first one. Innovation labs, right? Kind of bringing people together across sectors. And that's certainly we have been doing, and we continue to do that. The second key activity of this new university is moving into capacity building. And of course, we have developed like a number of methods and tools, but programs, how you can learn that, and 4-day foundation programs and so forth. But what's really exciting is that over the past few years, we have been really developing an online to offline method of that allowed us to put everything we have learned and all the methods and tools that we have developed free online into the web, and then help people to form place-based communities and apply these tools and methods in their own context and connect with each other worldwide. So what I'm talking about here is ULab. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. If not, you find kind of the infrastructures and information on that on our website, kind of my homepage, but even more on the presencing.org website. You see here people, kind of the pictures are from hubs, and all these dots, kind of this areas marked on this map are the places where people have formed their own hubs and starting to connect with each other. So it's a worldwide network of hundreds of hubs that have been focusing on ULab in the past, and that starting next month, starting in April, we hope we'll be focusing on the transformation of capitalism curriculum, which is basically like a series of of live sessions where we will feature inspiring stories of change that maybe will stimulate kind of similar initiatives in other places. So that's the second core activity: massive online to offline capacity building mechanisms that are available to everyone and that can help us to develop the new innovation skills that we need today at a level of scale that wasn't possible before. And the last one, the third one, is really about research, because if we cannot research what we are learning in all these lab applications, if we cannot kind of really find out what are the deep barriers, the deep structures of social change, and what is it that's getting into the way? Why is it that we know all the solutions that should happen in order to make the economy more sustainable and so on, but it's not happening? So what is accounting for the knowing-doing gap? We believe it has to do with the deep structures of social systems, or as we say, the deep structures of social fields. And we currently develop methods and tools that allow us to make these deep structures available, visible, kind of for research, but also for kind of a development work. On the left-hand side, you see a 4D mapping, a stakeholder mapping, and we are currently, it's kind of this important line of work, social presencing theater, that my colleague Arana Ayashi is leading together with others, and where we are linking now kind of this line of work with microphenomenology and other kind of research tools in order to develop a new field of research investigation that didn't quite really exist before, which is awareness-based field research, kind of where we make researchable kind of the deep structures of social systems or social fields, and how evolution of these structures can take place. Now, if you take these three things together, labs, capacity building, and research, what is it really, what we are doing? So you see the three divides on the top of the iceberg here: ecological divide, social divide, spiritual divide, which of course is the starting point of all our framings. What we try to do is, and you see that in the drawing here, to connect, to really integrate the lab work, the capacity building work, the research work. We try to integrate that by activating the deeper levels of our own humanity. That's really kind of to connect with the deeper sources of who we really are as a humanity, and activate kind of this kind of potential that is in part dormant today, but can be actualized. And we are launching right now a number of initiatives to actually make that happen. One of them is what I already mentioned before, Transforming Capitalism Lab. It will start with monthly live sessions. The website will go live April 1st. I'm also mentioning that because we really missed to announce that before. We were so busy to develop all these things, but we are really excited because it's a platform that engages everyone on three levels: inspiring stories, then you connect to the change makers who bring about these stories kind of in a very personal way. And the third aspect is kind of that methods and tools that help you to move your own intention, your own idea of change from intention to impact. And so the first live session you see here, it's April 12th. It will be always every second Thursday in the month. And it will be always focusing on one acupuncture point. It will be a live session beyond GDP, moving into the new paradigm of well-being that the new economy will be organized around. And there will be 2 weeks later, a community cafe. Wrapping up. So in all these three areas, the labs, the capacity building, the research, we start new initiatives this year. But what we also do is to strengthen the trunk of this tree that you see here, which is the platforms, right? So that we are upgrading the core team, the partners, of course, they're all the different institutional relationships that we are forming now, the practices, and most importantly, kind of the places that, we want to really cultivate hubs and kind of more central hubs that can serve as a campus for this emerging global movement, that is really around this purpose that's stated here: bridging the three divides, creating practical solutions for the ecological, the social, the spiritual divide, by renewing kind of our civilization forms, which means our economy, our democracy, and our ways of learning and leading together. Let me stop here.
Thanks, Otto. So we want to shift now to taking some of the questions that many of you have been putting in the Q&A panel. We have an extreme amount of engagement and conversation happening behind the scenes, Otto, with people networking and offering resources. And so thanks to all of you who have been so engaged with the conversation and engaged with one another. So Stephanie, are we ready with the first question?
I think we are. So we have a question from Brooking Gatewood, who I will now allow to speak in front of all of us. Hi, Brooking.
Fantastic.
And if you'd just like to unmute yourself.
Okay, should I just ask out loud?
Please.
Okay. Gosh, I'm nervous to have been chosen. So I'm a practitioner, and Otto, I've been following and using to the best of my ability your work for a while, so it's just a treat to meet you. And one of the challenges I find when you're not Otto Scharmer and you're trying to bring this approach into a context where people might have no context for it and aren't coming from a place of having any comfort or experience with ideas like drop into your heart or be in your body, how can you build the trust to take groups to those places that might be really uncomfortable? Especially, I work in activism context a lot, and there's always this sense of urgency, and we need to do things now, and that can just sort of tighten the creativity. So curious for your insights on how to get a group to be open to slowing down to move fast.
Yeah, that's a very good challenge. I would say kind of the area where you work with activists, that sometimes it's particularly challenging there. And so sometimes I would say, start small. Also find kind of, whoever you can partner with. You never really want to force like an intervention from outside into the group. So who, is a natural leader in the group, who actually already is on the same page with you on that and could help you to sense the right opportunity, the right timing for that. When you kind of introduce something like that, of course, there is also, that's why research is so important. I mentioned that before. And, particularly when you introduce mindfulness practices, why have we seen mindfulness moving from totally fringe and marginal 15 years ago to almost mainstream today across like 3-4 key areas in society? And the answer is, pioneers like John Kabat-Zinn, right, mindfulness-based stress reduction and so on, who did this work for many years. That's kind of, you need credible examples, right? So that's one. We can point to that today. But the other one is research. And that's why, I so much emphasize that as the third bubble, right, kind of in the U school concept, kind of the research. We need to strengthen that. But, when you just introduce like a contemplative practice or mindfulness practice, there's great research kind of that can be, allows you to gives you the credibility that's actually data-based, kind of, it's evidence-based, kind of, we know that, for example, meditation, right? Half an hour a day, just 2 weeks, right? It changes the structure and function of your brain. You can measure it. Mm-hmm. And so you have kind of a few of these examples, and that kind of, gives, that allows you to interrupt kind of maybe the habitual way of, jumping onto the same old. That's kind of one way. The other one is that you just, so sometimes, I say, okay, because you really, for example, when you force people through stuff like the case connects and they can't give advice and so on. So you force them to many things that don't feel natural. And then I always say, that's the whole point about the method, because if it would feel natural to you now, right, then you would be doing what you're always doing. And if you like the results, just keep doing it. Mm-hmm. And so the whole point why they would bring in someone like you is that actually they learn new practices. So in the early stage, when you do that, it doesn't feel natural. And that's the whole point. That's why it's a method. So it's also creating a little bit like a space for, even though it may feel awkward and uncomfortable, maybe it's still okay. So you need to legitimize that.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe most importantly, you need at least kind of one real partner, because, you know, you and I may not be credible with them, but, you know, they have their own peers. If one who is credible inside that community is actually saying, that's actually a good idea, and I heard this is, so then there is kind of a more open space. And the last thing I want to say is, whatever you start with, you know, you need to start small, and it must create a benefit right away, right? So that there is the first time they do any of that, that is actually a pleasant, a good, a helpful experience for them. And then they were immediately open to more. Frankly, I am shocked how little feedback I ever get against, you know, mindfulness, contemplative practices, intentional stillness, all these things. So I often think that, you know, maybe I'm not doing the wrong thing because I'm not doing enough where there would be real pushback. And the reason is, I think, also because, yes, it's true, you know, you have the MIT background, that helps. I readily admit that, right? But that's why we create this community, right? So because it allows everyone to build from that, to borrow from that legitimacy that comes with that comes with the research background. And in my experience is, so many people, particularly the younger people, they are so open to these new practices. They just have never had the opportunity to experience a quality version of that. So I am generally shocked about the lack of pushback you get when you create, right, a robust environment for these deeper experiences.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooking. And I think we have time for one more question. We have Janine from Brazil joining us. Hi, Janine, and if you just want to unmute yourself. Janine, you're still on mute.
I think the host can unmute her as well.
There we go.
Yes. Hi, Janine.
We still can't hear you, Janine. I'll read your questions out loud, but it's so lovely to see you. Otto, Janine was curious about the 3 key learnings from the Worldwide Lab so far. What are your 3 key learnings?
The Worldwide Lab, so which Worldwide Lab?
Labs, all of
the U Lab,
yes.
and the other ones. Oh, that's a great question. I never thought about it that way. I love it. So I would say the first question, so the first key learning is that there is an amazing potential and readiness and willingness and capacity of people to self-organize in the form of a new formats that, are totally outside of traditional learning formats, that blend the contemplative spiritual with the practical hands-on with the systems change. So in the past, traditional wisdom was, oh yeah, you can do this deep transformation work, but it's like max 24 people and it takes such and so long, and so no longer true, right? You can do it on a global scale. It's multi-local, and it's much more self-directed than any other experience would earlier kind of would suggest. Secondly, I would think kind of for us, the community who is running ULAB, who is now moving everything we learned, we move now into Transforming Capitalism Lab and try to make that available to a larger purpose. I would say one of our key learnings is that their place-based communities is key. So, and that is a real paradox, because you would think, well, the online, the digital, that's where the key is, right? So we did all of that. And what we are saying is the key is not the digital alone. The key is linking that to place-based communities, to real networks, to real people who come together. And there's the deeper alchemy of change has nothing to do with all this digital, I'm not saying nonsense, all this digital, abstract soulless information, right? It has to do with embodied presence that happens in real community. And that's what we try to be in service of. That's where, intelligent organizing means that you support, you create structures where the hub host can learn from each other and so forth. So that's, I would say, the second learning. And the third learning is that it has to do really with inspiration. I think it has. So a big surprise for us was really, and that was also against the conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom of MOOCs is what? You pre-record everything, right? Everything is dead, basically. Can't change by the current moment. But we said live sessions is the key. You bring together people from around the world in the now, and even if only for 1 hour. And there is, very much to our own surprise, magic happen in these live sessions. And it's hard to explain really what that is, but we believe it has to do with tapping into a deeper intention of our human consciousness, right? So there's something dormant that we bring. It's our life's journey towards, I don't know, I can feel it. Can I say it? Maybe not, otherwise the book wouldn't be that thick. So we can feel the future, right? We know that, but it's hard to articulate. And that feeling is actually amplified through kind of the global community coming together. And then we do, for example, a mindfulness practice. Kind of we make the global community of change makers sense and see itself, right? So there's a feeling of my own body. It's a feeling of how we connect as a global community. So that being part of this global movement and kind of allows many of us to tap more deeper into our real intention of our life, of our work. And if I do that, I tap into a source of energy that cannot be depleted. The more I tap into that, the more I do, the more energy I get. And so that is kind of the other part of the alchemy, you could say, right? It's kind of the power of intention, kind of if we, and you can't like force it from your head. You need to create the right kind of container condition for that. And sometimes we are more lucky in doing that and more successful, and sometimes maybe less, but you feel it when it's there. And that's probably really to understand what that really is and kind of to be more literate and kind of organizing around that and being in service of that. That's probably the third learning. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine, and thank you, Otto. We have come to the end of our session today, so a couple of quick reminders. We will be sending a follow-up email that will include many of the resources that we discussed on today's session, including 2 websites that you can visit to get more information from Otto, ottoscharmer.com and presencing.org. You can also learn more about the newest book, The Essentials of Theory U, by visiting book.ottoscharmer.com, and we invite you to do that. Thank you to all of you for your engagement with us today. We are thrilled by your participation and energy, and thank you, Otto, for sharing your heart and your inspiration with us.
Thanks to everyone, and I look forward to reconnect maybe in one of the upcoming Transforming Capitalism Lab sessions. All the best. Thanks. Bye-bye.